Welcome back to the Smarter Marketer podcast, brought to you by Rocket Agency. I'm your host, James Lawrence. Welcome back to the Smarter Marketer podcast. I'm here today with a smiling Joe Older. Welcome back to the pod.
Thanks, James. Good to be here.
Why are you smiling?
I'm smiling because I'm very excited to talk to you for now.
Oh, very good, very good. Joe has been on the pod before, as mentioned. He's head of SEO and AI optimization at Rocket. Under his leadership of SEO, Rocket has picked up some awesome industry recognition, Best Integrated Agency at the 2026 APAC Search Awards, Best SEO Agency at the 2024 APAC Search Awards. And Joe, you're very much at the forefront of Rocket's response to how AI is reshaping search, what our position is, how we're helping clients navigate the changing landscapes. You and your team have been doing some awesome research into what's happening in the landscape, which I think is awesome for the industry within Australia and also obviously great for our clients. The reason we're having this conversation today is we held a webinar 2 days ago. It was the second biggest webinar I think we've ever held at Rocket. We had over 800 in-house marketers from around Australia register for it. And the topic was AI search in Australia in 2026. So on the back of how popular that session was, we thought it'd be good to have a conversation on the pod. We're not going to run it like a webinar. I think that'd be kind of pretty dull. So we just want to have a conversation around the key themes from the webinar. And the session itself was very much broken into two core areas. The first was the state of AI search in Australia in 2026, which was on the back of a lot of research that Rocket has been doing as to what's actually happening with Google and ChatGPT and all the major platforms. And then the second part was to give in-house marketers assistance and help on how to actually rank and drive visibility in the large language models, ChatGPT, AI overviews with Google and Google's AI mode. So I think, Joe, as a logical starting point, I think it'd be good just to kick it off with the state of search report that you and the team have put together. If you could just talk a little bit about the methodology and the kind of process you and the team have gone through to try to actually give Australian marketers a better understanding as to what's happening. I think there's often, don't want to kind of speak for you, but I think often a lot of the research we get comes out of North America, to a lesser extent Europe. Often the data's not quite right, but even a lot of the reports that we kind of get access to, they tell part of the story or they're vendor funded. So they're coming out of platforms that have a pretty heavy bias in one way or another. So it'd be good just to, if you could speak to the research that you and the team have been doing.
Yeah, sure. So the research was basically split into two different sections. So the first section, what we did is we have access to over 150 Australian businesses, and we actually have access to their Google Analytics. We can get really accurate data. It's also across a very wide range of industries. So once we get an average from that, we can really see how the overall metrics are changing. So the data we got from that I thought was really valuable. Number one, specifically on the AI front, we were able to see how much AI traffic has grown on average across over 150 Australian websites. And with part of that as well, we can also see the split between the different tools. So there's been lots of like murmurings that ChatGPT is no longer the important one. Now everyone's using Claude, Gemini, etc. So we have a lot of information on that. A lot of the studies that have been done currently use clickstream data, which basically monitors people's web usage and works for a bunch of extensions. So that misses out on a lot of information when people are using apps on their phone. So we definitely do not have the 100% accurate, but I think it is a really good look of the data that is available. So that was the first side, and I will share some data on that. I'm sure I can go through the call. The second was looking at the overlap between LLMs and Google. So primarily AI overviews and Google, and then also ChatGPT and Google. So there's been a lot of talks again of people saying that the ChatGPT search and Google search is all the same thing. It's all the same techniques. There's been lots of studies that have been put out there where the overlap has been pretty low. So I really wanted to design a study that looked at all different angles here and also took into account how people search on each platform. So how someone searches on Google, I think the average is around 3 to 4 terms that they'll be putting in, where ChatGPT is 6 to 8. So if we were looking for a digital marketing agency, we might just put that into Google. For ChatGPT, it might be what is the best digital marketing agency for a B2B business. So there was a lot of kind of work in the back end, just working out what the terms we track on each tool. And then from that, we basically have all of the overlap stats.
And I think if you could just speak a little bit to the sheer volume of data, I think that there was, and obviously the part of the study that focused just on our clients, obviously the weakness of that is it's our clients. In this, you're investing in an agency, the quality of the whether it's good or bad quality work. I like to think it's very good quality work, but that's obviously going to skew that basket. But then also, I think speaking more to the other kind of data points and volumes of data that we went through.
Yeah, so we basically did every possible variation. So we checked every single AI tool to see if there was correlation between ChatGPT, Gemini, Claude. For ChatGPT specifically, because everyone's search is different and each result returned is slightly different, we did anywhere from 10 searches per pull to up to 100 searches. So across the entire data set, it was across, I think, around 4,500 sub industries and core industries in Australia. And the total number of data points was over, yeah, it was, I think it was 700,000 just prompt responses alone that we looked at.
Yeah, and I think it's really interesting. I think it's interesting to be able to compare the changes over time and then to see, and there's definitely some real overlap with some of the studies that we have traditionally relied on overseas, which I think is a good thing, pointing to the fact that there is a lot of kind of veracity to the data. So I think just jumping into some of the insights, when we framed the webinar session, I spoke to the macro landscape, and it's legitimately the biggest change in digital in 20 years, right? The way that behavior is moving. And the data that we're looking at has 49% of Australians using large language models on a monthly basis, which might come as a surprise to marketers because I think on our LinkedIn, we presume that it's every single person, but then it is 78% of knowledge workers, right? So 78% of knowledge workers are using a large language model on a monthly basis. And then when there's some awesome research, I think it's the APAC B2B buyer's guide that was done very back end of last year, that 93% of B2B buyers are using AI on the path to purchase. So this is, and probably not, I'm not saying anything that most listeners to the pod wouldn't know, but it is a tool that Australians are turning to find the answers to things, and it's heavily impacting the buyer journey, right?
Yeah.
So in terms of what we're seeing, Joe, market share between large language models?
Yeah, sure. So we have kind of two different metrics from this. The first we have from Stat Counter, where it looks at all of the different metrics that are available. And I looked at a number of third-party tools. I also did some of my own research. And this was the one that I felt best represented the current market share. So ChatGPT was around 68% market share, and that had fallen from this time last year on 85%. So it has definitely been losing market share to some of the other big players. So Copilot had seen a massive growth. Gemini, Perplexity, and Claude have all grown massively. I think the one that had grown the most was Claude, but it started at such a small base that it's still only around 6% of the market share. But that doesn't necessarily mean they're the ones sending traffic to websites. So when we looked at our own data set, really the main one that's sending website traffic is ChatGPT by a huge margin. So around 90% of traffic is being driven by ChatGPT. I think it was 88%. Gemini was around 6.6%, Perplexity 3%, Claude hardly even registered, it was like 1.5%. So even though the market share is much higher overall, the ones actually driving visits to the web is a lot lower from some of these other tools.
And is the main rationale for that we use different tools in different ways, where like Claude has become, it is so interesting. And I think we're so guilty in the marketing industry of assuming that the average Australian is using technology and tools the way that we do. And Claude in the last 6 months or so has had such a huge ramp up in the industry. But is it fair to say that it's horses for courses, and the reason why people might be using Claude might be more around vibe coding and analytics and whatever else versus searching for the best running shoe, which they might be using ChatGPT for instead, or Gemini?
Yeah, 100%. I think it's a couple of factors. I think the main one is there's definitely different tools for different uses. So people might be using ChatGPT and then they're also using Claude or Microsoft Copilot for doing more stuff at work. I think we're also seeing a lot more companies invest in AI this year. So we would have seen a big uptick in Copilot, even Claude to some extent, where the company is getting their employers to use it at work, but then they still might be using ChatGPT from a personal level. And then I think the third one is some of these tools are pretty bad as search functionality. Like even Gemini, which is obviously Google backed, Google product. If you search for products on there, it's really hard to even see where the link is, if it's going to the right place. So the amount of people that are then actually using it for search is pretty low, where ChatGPT is probably the one doing this the best. Obviously, we have Perplexity, which is a search engine, but that has actually seen a bit of a drop when we compare the data year on year.
That's interesting. But I think the big question for marketers is, what's the impact on Google? And am I getting less traffic to my website? Is that because people aren't using Google anymore? Is it something different? And I think you've done I think this is the area where I find some of the research that Rocket's doing to be most interesting. So I think it'd be good if you could just talk a little bit about that dynamic, because I think it is something that marketers are getting questioned from non-marketers about. So I think having some data to support what's happening is really useful.
Yeah, sure. So, like, in terms of is Google dying, I think the answer is no. Like, they just released their Q1 report, and their search and other revenue is up 19%, just 2026, the first quarter. When we looked at all of our clients, and obviously we're doing SEO work for some of these, but not all of them, we saw an increase in impressions. So that every time someone performs a Google search, so buy running shoes, how often is your brand appearing, not being clicked? We saw an increase in around 43%, which normally means we're appearing for more, but also there are more people searching than ever. I've seen other stats that search is on Google are up around 20%, so very much in line with that. That being said, traffic from Google search is falling. So although more people are searching than ever, businesses are likely to see less traffic actually coming onto their website. So there's been quite a few reports on this. There was a general one that was done by Marta early this year. They found that the average website has lost around 35% in traffic. When we looked at our client pool, and we'd obviously seen a 43% increase in impressions, our positions were really good. So we're doing really well, I would say. We had still seen a 2.5% drop in clicks year over year. So we are still seeing falling. And then when you look at anything publisher related, they have definitely seen a huge drop. So Daily Mail Australia lost 2.5 million readers year over year. They were actually, the CMO was writing in some SEO forums asking for help. And there's like Business Insider and a few of these other publications have also been really hit as well.
Yeah, there was obviously a leading question, is Google dying? And I can't stress enough that we are platform agnostic at Rocket, right? Where our kind of North Star is how do we put our clients in front of their perfect clients? And I was in Google Australia yesterday and meeting with a pretty senior member of the team, and they are super buoyant. It's really interesting. I think the feeling in that organization is very different to probably what it was 18 months ago, when there was a lot of the news media was code red for Google, et cetera, et cetera. But it feels like the moat around their products and the the fact I think they've had a lot of this technology for a very long time, but they probably weren't able to roll it out because it's not as safe, right? Large language models have a whole bunch of errors and mistakes, but once OpenAI let the lid out, it allows Google to rip in as well. But there's no doubt that the growth of AI overviews appearing on a broader range of terms is having a massive impact on businesses that relied on kind of content and publish type kind of content to drive traffic, right?
Yeah, 100%. And I think on that, so where the traffic drop is actually coming from, I think ChatGPT and the other tools are taking a small amount of traffic. So you might have previously gone to Google to research something. Now you're going to ChatGPT. And then, as you said, Google's response to this was, how do we get people back onto Google? So then they released AI overviews, which is the kind of answer snippet at the top of the search result. So basically designed to answer the user's question without them going to ChatGPT. But then it also, as a result, means they're not going to websites as much. I actually am surprised. Like, I would think Google is probably somewhat hurting their traffic and their value by doing that. But I think they just have to keep up with these large language models. And I actually have some stats on that. So like when an AI overview is present, there's a 58% drop in clicks to the position one in Google. So if your business previously ranked position one in Google, now there's an AI overview present, you're seeing a reduction in clicks of around 60%. And now AI overviews have also ramped up significantly. So we did a big study on this last year. Now we've updated the metrics. When we did it this time last year, AI overviews were present in around 10% of all searches, and now they're sitting around 30%. So it's been a huge uplift.
Yeah, and I think you're right. I think them rolling it out from, first of all, rolling it out at all and then taking it from 10% to 30%, to me, that's not necessarily Google taking a short-term view on this. I think it's a protective move to keep users within the Google search ecosystem when they're trying to find the answers to things that they started to move towards OpenAI for. And it's a complete sample of one, but I had my little boy on the lounge the other day and he just turned to me and said, "Oh, I love this, the way that Google generates these overviews for me." And you can see that it's changing the way that he's engaging with the search tool. But it has prevented, I think, a lot of leakage into ChatGPT.
Yeah, 100% agree.
Really interesting. So I guess the next point is then, so if Google's kind of managing to protect a lot of mind share, if the large language models aren't pushing heaps and heaps of traffic out, why does this stuff matter?
Yeah, so I think it will be interesting to actually share the stat because I think if you look in some places, like if you look on LinkedIn, it doesn't make it seem like the Google is completely dead and ChatGPT is driving now all the traffic to websites. We looked at this in a number of different ways. And when we compared the traffic coming from Google and traditional search engines, Bing, etc., ChatGPT and all of the other AI tools generated about 1.24%. So it's a very small margin. Ahrefs published that Google sends around 200% more traffic to websites than any of the AI tools. And I think then you saying, why does it matter? I think that is really the tip of the iceberg. The 1% of the top is what we see coming through GA4. We mentioned before that I don't think all of these AI tools are really designed for search, but it doesn't mean people are not going to them from search. So the average click-through rate, if someone is searching on ChatGPT for find me the best running shoes, how often they actually click on a link from that is only around 1%. So it's really low click-through rate coming from the tools. The interesting data that we have and also a report from SEMrush is I think people compare it to it's either Google or ChatGPT that you're using, but that's really not what we are seeing. We are seeing people use basically both tools hand in hand. So SEMrush released this report that 77% of users are using both tools basically together. So 68% will go to AI first and then they will validate it with Google. So they're doing the kind of research piece, the before the search, they're getting the information, what are the best running shoes for me? And then once they've landed on an answer, they're then going to Google to finalize that purchase. So it's having a huge impact on influence, even if the traffic is a lot smaller.
And that's the really important takeaway, which is, it's funny, I think it's almost backwards, where this time last year, marketers started to see a drop in traffic to their websites, and they were seeing a lot of content and commentary around the growth in large language models. So I think the assumption was the traffic's down because the large language models are taking that. It's actually not what's happened. The traffic's down because of AI overviews and what Google has done itself in platform. But the rise of the large language models is completely legitimate, and it comes down to influence. And the issue is that we've always measured digital by traffic. Traffic coming to my website, what's the conversion rate? Is it good? Is it growing? And that's been the narrative for the last 20 years. But it's just not how influence works in the large language models. And it's why it's really important to go back to those headline numbers at the beginning, which is 49% of Australians are using them on a monthly basis. 78% of knowledge workers are using them on a monthly basis. And when B2B buyers are moving into market, 93% of the time they're using a large language model to help them evaluate. So it's, if you're not in there, you're really at the mercy of something that you can't control. And I thought it was interesting, Joe, through the webinar, and they're not a client of ours, but using the example of Optus and just looking at a lot of, and we'll jump onto measurement because I think this is the bit that marketers need to solve, but looking at the narrative about Optus within the large language models, it's so negative, right? Maybe if you could talk a little bit about that, Joe.
Yeah, sure. So we have a deliverable where we look at how ChatGPT and other LLMs are perceiving brands on ChatGPT. So if someone is looking for a mobile provider or a network provider, then what is the kind of sentiment that's coming back? And when we were looking around Optus, comparing Optus to competitors, or even just looking in that space, they were mentioned negatively 72% of the time. So if someone is doing a research on who should I use for my phone plan, in 72% of the time, it was basically coming back with, do not use Optus. They have poor customer service. They have network reliability. There's issues with trust and regulatory. So if more and more consumers, and I think there's a stat in Australia, it's like 1 out of 3 consumers are using AI in total across all industries to make purchases. So 1 out of 3, if they're then going to ChatGPT looking for a mobile provider, Optus is losing that market share because how they are being perceived by ChatGPT is bad.
And there's another brand we were looking at, which I'm not going to mention, and it was like, would you recommend them? And it was simply no. It's literally that black and white. So I think that leads to the next question, Joe. Like, how do businesses, or maybe speak to how we're helping our clients, right? What are the practical things that we're doing for our clients to help give them insight into performance within ChatGPT, Gemini, et cetera?
Yeah. So I think basically everything we do has to start with measurement in these tools. It's really challenging to do any type of measurement. So we mentioned a few different metrics here. And the reason for that is because we don't have any accurate data coming from all the tools. It's the reason we have to do all of these in-depth studies. So there is no way to see how many people have found your brand on ChatGPT and then gone to Google unless they have clicked through, which is only around 1% of the time. And there's no native tools provided. It's also really hard to know what people are actually searching. So that's where we start. We basically come out with a modeling on this is how people are searching through SEO traditionally, look at the search volume, and then we come up with, based on some data and research that we've done, this is how we perceive the user to most likely to be searching on ChatGPT. There's a few tools available where we can extract that. Again, on Google, it's around 3 to 4 words, ChatGPT 6 to 12 words. So yeah, I used an example earlier of like digital marketing agency versus what is the best digital marketing agency for B2B. So once we have those terms, we then track them basically on a daily basis. So we would run these search terms 100 times per day. There's a number of AI tools out there that can do it. They are quite expensive. And the reason they do it 100 times per day is the response basically changes every single time. So it's not the same as Google. Are we ranking in top 10 or are we being mentioned? It's out of the 100 times that we perform this search, how often is Rocket Agency appearing within these results and trying to get a market share that's larger than your competitor. It's the top line way. You obviously then can have GA4 set up and a few other tools, but I would say that's a gold standard at the moment.
And we'll include a link to the webinar in the show notes for this podcast. So you can find that on the Rocket website, under the podcast drop down, because in the webinar, Joe shows examples of the types of dashboards that we're building for clients to allow them to better measure what's happening within the large language models. And we never overly promote Rocket through this podcast. We're always trying to genuinely give great information to in-house marketers. But if the measurement piece is something you're struggling within AI, or you're struggling with actual optimization, which we call GEO, AI search optimization, feel free to reach out to us, jamesl@rocketagency.com.au, because it's something I can see marketers struggling with. And I think a lot of them either just don't know what's going on, which is why the measurement piece is so hard, or are struggling to advocate within their organization because the way that we have spoken about digital for the last 20 years is different to what we're seeing here. And we've got some really good aggregator data as well that shows the impact of when you're running campaigns within large language models, tracking like other metrics around like increases in branded search, potentially increases or decreases in direct traffic, to try to start to build a case showing what impact large language models are having within your particular category. Because it's definitely not as easy to track as traditional meta campaigns or Google ad campaigns where you can spin it up through analytics. It's pretty easy. So Joe, I think it'd be useful now just to talk about how to actually rank, right? So how do you improve visibility within large language models, both from a prominence viewpoint, but also making sure that the narrative being told is what you actually want it to be, right? In the Optus example, or in the one when we didn't mention the brand, where it's literally, would you recommend this business? And it's no. What are the types of things you need to do to start? I was going to say manipulating, but that's not what we do. We're trying to put the best of the best case forward. So is it just simply just do SEO, or is it different to that?
I guess like maybe we start there. Is it the same as just SEO? Because that is like one of the big things I wanted to get out of the research that we did. So looking at AI overviews, and I think in like the kind of SEO, GEO space, AI overviews and ChatGPT are really merged together, where I almost see them as a bit separate because the influence is very different. I'd say AI overviews are a lot more informational content. You're still in the Google platform. And naturally, if it's in the Google platform, the algorithm is likely to be very similar. So we actually found if you rank number one on Google, 60% of the time you will be included in an AI overview, which is pretty high. Like it's not 100%. Top 10 was around 43%. So it's very similar. And I almost see it as like an update on like knowledge graph, featured snippets, where previously you would search a calculator and get it. Instead, you're just getting the answer. When it comes to ChatGPT, however, it's a very different story. So this was based on doing 8 calls on ChatGPT. If you just do one, the numbers are less. When we did 8 calls on ChatGPT and we compared the brands that came back in ChatGPT versus the top 10 on Google, there was around a 15% overlap. And there was 80% of the time ChatGPT was using URLs that were not even mentioned in Google's top 10 at all. So the overlap between the tools is very different.
And that's something that I get really frustrated by, which is a more traditional or conservative part of the SEO community has basically spun this narrative, which is they're the same thing. Optimizing for Google is the same as optimizing for ChatGPT. And it's just not true. Like the idea that if you're on the first page of Google, you're only a 15% chance of appearing for the same term or a similar term within ChatGPT. It's chalk and cheese. And the idea that 80% of ChatGPT citations don't even exist in Google's top 10, it just proves and demonstrates that there is such a divergence in the way that those two platforms are synthesizing data. So it does warrant, first of all, a different measurement framework, but then it warrants a different approach to the approach you're taking to optimize within Google, right?
Yeah, 100%. And I think there is some foundations we'll maybe get on where there is some SEO put in. The skill set is maybe similar, but how you actually do it, the metrics you're looking at, where we're reaching out, where we're creating content is very different.
Yeah, and I'm not at all, because I've been sparring a little bit on LinkedIn around it. I've never suggested that the vast bulk of the tactics are necessarily different. There's a lot of overlap with the approaches that you take, content and offsite and brand and all that kind of stuff. But for me, it's the same as you're not going to take the same approach to Facebook because you're going to take to TikTok. Yes, all the levers potentially are the same, great content, well managed, et cetera, et cetera. But it's a horses for courses, right? It depends on your industry, depends on what you're trying to achieve, how the two channels interact. Like it definitely requires a different approach.
Yeah, 100%. I think that this example is a great example. We would maybe look at reviews a little bit within SEO, but we're never looking at the sentiment online. That's probably more of a branding task originally, and that's starting to now overlap into the GEO stuff.
Yeah, it's so true, isn't it? Okay, can we talk then about ranking? I'd love to frame this in the context of what's actually working for our clients. We've been running GEO campaigns for just on 3 years now, with obviously a massive uplift in the last 12 to 18 months. I think you mentioned it's our fastest growing service, right? And I'm also conscious of not on a podcast format, not laboring too much around too much specificity on each of these things. I think if listeners are interested, they can catch that webinar. But from a top level, I think it'd be good to break it into the core basket. So when I start with technical, what are the technical things that you're finding Rocket clients are doing or not doing that really helps to improve visibility in large language models?
Yeah, I think maybe before we jump in, it would be good to just have a very quick explanation of how I see it working. I really think that ChatGPT is like a user. If you were searching for an expensive product, i.e. a car, what are the types of things that you would look at? You might look at reviews, you might look at industry publications, like the car specific website to make sure it has all of the features that you have. You would compare it to other brands. where on Google, it might just be one search, right? It's all of the research that comes behind it. I really see ChatGPT as doing that user part there. So then when we move on to the actual ranking, like first starting with technical, and this is maybe the one that's most black and white, but it has the biggest impact. It's also the most technical, but like to simplify it, you want to make sure that ChatGPT can actually access your website. That is the most basic fundamental part. There's a few things that can happen here. So we've had clients that run Cloudflare, and Cloudflare was automatically blocking all AI bots for a while. So like basically you want to make sure your AI bots can access your website. Otherwise your content is never going to get indexed. At scale as well, it's just making sure that even if AI tools can access the website, there's sometimes security measures in place that will basically limit the amount of time the user can access your website. But these can also then impact these user agents or these LLMs. So we're seeing them basically get limited from the number of pages they can access. So there's a few like technical things like that are really important.
And when in the webinar, you had a case study of a client in the legal space, and they've had ridiculous improvements in visibility along with traffic from large language models. And it was some real foundational stuff here, right? And like a really well organized business that does digital actually quite well, but just not actually putting attention into this particular area as it relates to ChatGPT has had like ridiculous results for them.
Yeah. Yeah. I think we basically saw a 200% increase in 3 months. And a lot of that were AI tools could hit the website, but they were basically getting limited. Like it was basically coming across right from their security and their software that is like an attack on their site, and these crawlers hitting the website. And I just think a lot of businesses have not looked at that to make sure they are allowing it. Similar to if you block Google, you're not going to be indexing Google. You need to also consider that for these tools. There's also some like software and other things that AI tools are a bit more basic than Google that you need to check as well. I think to give the user the takeaway on how to do this, like the most basic thing is just asking ChatGPT, hey, can you read me the last line of this page on my website and see what it returns? It will sometimes return something that is completely wrong and just hallucinate. So you'll need to check that. But that's sometimes a good telltale sign if it is having issues hitting your site.
Google kind of was that at the beginning, but it's become so much more advanced in kind of handling JavaScript, et cetera. But the way ChatGPT works, you have to kind of spoon feed it. Site speed, which has always been a massive signal in traditional SEO, is a huge issue with ChatGPT and large language models.
Yeah, there was actually a study that was done, and it was like, I think it was like 40% of the websites that ChatGPT was going to, it couldn't actually access. But like page speed is one. If your page loads slower than 4 to 5 seconds, then ChatGPT will just bounce off and it will go to one of your competitors most likely. So it is really important.
Yeah. Schema, which I think you were saying ChatGPT doesn't use, but the other large language models do, and just best practice anyway for
Yeah.
general SEO.
Yeah, exactly.
Super important. Any other plain language hints for listeners as it relates to technical setup before we move on to copy?
The other one so I gave the example there of just checking it can read the last line of text. The other thing I would really recommend, especially if you're selling a product or service, is if you have a ChatGPT account, a lot of the other tools now have this, but go into agent mode. So if you click on agent mode and say, hey, can you make a purchase? Can you send an inquiry, whatever your main CTA is, via ChatGPT using agent mode, you can actually watch how it goes through the site and if it hits any issues. So in the webinar, I use an example trying to book a flight through Qantas using agents, and it cannot load the Qantas website. I think this is going to become more and more important. Google this month released an article on how to optimize the agent to make sure your website is friendly. So I think this is what we're going to start to see more and more of.
Yeah, nice. Didn't they also advertise a role with GEO in it?
Yeah, they did. And it hopefully ended the long discussion.
Is it AEO? Is it GEO? Is it AIO? So we've settled on GEO.
Now,
Thankfully, we did just prior to Google's announcement. And then the next, so I think tips and tricks around copywriting. Large language models, clearly, they're built around language, they're built around tokens. What are you doing with our copy team at Rocket to have them writing in a way that works in terms of maximizing visibility for clients in large language models?
so I think like the first thing when it comes to copywriting is maybe the most obvious, but it's becoming more and more important, is there is so much content out there that is the same, written by AI, etc. So anything you can do to invest in high quality content, and that might be instead of publishing 10 blogs, you publish one that is like an industry paper, has data, has statistics, and is something actually unique, like the chances of you being cited are going to be way more. So that's like the first place I would start. There's obviously a lot you can do around that. The other thing is, as we mentioned before, like ChatGPT acts like a user doing research. So trying to understand the paths that ChatGPT takes, you can actually do this if you go to thinking mode on ChatGPT and you click thinking or sources, you can see what other searches it is done in the background. So for the example of the car, if you're searching for what is the best car for a family, you want an article around that. You might want what is the best car for a family of five, or like just making sure you have content pillars that address every different angle. What is the safest car for families? Like thinking about the other types of questions that your users would likely have when looking for your product or service, and then building out what we call content pillars around that. Because ChatGPT is very lazy, it will look for basically the main heading. I think it's 70% or so of answers are generated within the first paragraph or two. So also including things like too long didn't read, summaries at the top are really useful as well.
Yeah. And I think in plain language, it is so important to be adding to the narrative. You need to be adding awesome content into whatever industry or sub industry you're writing on, original research, stuff that hasn't been out there before, because the the large language models are so good now with writing awesome emails and awesome white papers and whatever else, but they're kind of just spinning up content that already exists in the world. And it's so easy for them to identify that. And I remember the first time I played with ChatGPT, I was like, oh, what does this mean for Rocket's copy team? And our team has literally doubled in size since that period. And it is because there is this insatiable demand for really high quality content. The idea of your pretty average 500 to 700 word blog article with the keyword stuffed in it 8 times is just worthless now. Like that content, you could be writing those articles in the background while Joe and I talk on the podcast pretty easily. So you really focus on quality, not on volume. Absolutely key takeaway. In terms of content types, a little bit different, right? But what are the actual types of content as opposed to how you're writing it, Joe? What are you seeing works well?
Yeah, so I think again, like just having your head, ChatGPT is lazy. So any of the work that you can take out of it is what's going to really help. So the type of content from that is like listicle. So what are the 10 best ways to do X? What are the 10 best businesses in this service? And because doing that, you're answering multiple different questions that ChatGPT might have. Same as like pros and cons content. Like you're already giving both arguments without ChatGPT needing to go to multiple sources. So that really works well. Anything like FAQ focused, including FAQs at the bottom of articles, but even just like what are the frequently asked questions on X service perform really well. Anything within the specific location your users are likely to be searching. So ChatGPT really personalizes using memory, etc. So if you're searching from Sydney, it will know that and it will prioritize content that is written for that audience.
Nice one. There's some good practical takeaways there as to kind of how the models themselves are working. If you want more detail, just encourage you to look at the webinar, as we do go into a lot of specificity on that. And I think just in terms of the final big pillar that the large language models are looking at, which is all around authority and brand, just talk, I think, just generally around the how and the why of that.
Yeah, sure. So I think like one of the biggest changes between AI models and Google is what happens outside of your site is more important than ever. If someone's searching for a business on Google and like trying to find out more information, most of the time they're going to go to that website. They might go to one or two sources. Within these large language models, there's no guarantee they'll even check your website. So everywhere that exists on the web, you want to own, and anywhere that your users might be going or ChatGPT might be going in this kind of funnel is where you want to own as well. So like owning your Wikipedia page, any social profiles, making sure all the information is correct there. We've had a lot of clients where we looked into this and it's been ChatGPT has been bringing in sometimes they're even the wrong business, like it's been diluted where they're getting the information and a bit confused. And we've had to come up with new content to put it on the straight there.
Yeah, it's just fascinating, isn't it? And I feel that has step charged, like literally the foundation of Google was link building, right? So that was obviously a huge part of the early and to mid phases of that kind of SEO growth through the 2000s and 2010s. And it was always important to tidy up citations and just make sure that stuff was consistent. But this just step changes it, right? Because we have had so many instances where literally the wrong business is being brought in, potentially in a different vertical, completely wrong information. The importance of that is just magnified.
Yeah. Yeah. And sometimes it's an easy fix. We had one client where it was pulling in a US brand that operated in a different industry. All we did is built a citation on that website, and now they have the correct business. So now it's fixing information. So it's just seeing where it's pulling information and making sure that is updated.
Awesome. Joe, thanks a lot for coming on today to chat all things AI search and SEO and GEO. I thought I'd put you on the spot here with a rapid fire round of questions. It's all got to be 1, 2, or 3 words.
Okay.
You ready for this?
I think so.
The biggest ranking factor in AI search right now.
I would say external sources. So yeah, like roundup content.
Most overrated SEO tactic in the AI world.
I would say trying to optimize the AI overviews because the overlap is just so high for Google and it's very non-informational. So
What's more important, brand? What's more important, brand or backlinks?
I would say brand.
One platform leading AI search today.
At ChatGPT.
The biggest mistake marketers are making with AI.
Not monitoring or having any type of framework, or monitoring incorrectly, like monitoring the same way you would as Google and other tools.
One metric that matters most.
I would say citation share against your competitors, like
Okay.
shareable.
Good answer, that one. And then this is more broad, but what's your one piece of advice to an in-house marketer?
I would say do not ignore this as a channel. Make sure at least you have reporting and setup, and probably your brand online is going to become more and more important. So making sure that, how customers are talking about you is positive. There's not too much negative press out there, etc.
Great answer. Joe, thanks so much for coming back onto the pod.
Awesome. Thanks, James.